Now we go to national coverage of the presidential election. LaShonda McEwen joins us now with more on that. What can you tell us, LaShonda?
Well, Jennifer, after months of campaigning, the 2024 election is now in the hands of the voters. Christian Benavidez reports from outside polls in Atlanta.
Polling sites across the country are seeing strong turnout as voters decide the next president. Voters say they came out to weigh in on the issues.
The southern border is definitely a big issue for me.
For me, it's going to be women's rights.
Heading into Election Day, polls showed former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris basically tied in the 7 key battleground states, including Georgia, which set an early voting record and has busy polling places today.
I love the energy.
So you think both sides are energized?
To a certain extent, yeah, I think so. I think you're seeing more passion.
What do you think is motivating those who are voting for Kamala Harris?
Hope, honestly. Hope everybody, sees that America is ready to turn this new page in our history.
Harris spent the day calling into radio shows before stopping by a phone bank at DNC headquarters.
We have all these volunteers here. You'd be really excited to know. There are just a lot of young people who are here calling the neighbors all over the country.
Casting his ballot in Palm Beach, Florida, Trump sowed doubt about the process.
I'm hearing in Pennsylvania they won't have an answer till 2 or 3 days from now. I think it's an absolute outrage if that's the case.
Both candidates will be watching closely with one of the most contentious and unpredictable campaigns in history now in the hands of the people. Christian Benavidez, CBS News, Atlanta.
Vice President Harris spent the day doing radio interviews in battleground states. She'll hold her election party at her alma mater, Howard University. Former President Trump stopped at his campaign office in Palm Beach, Florida, and says he plans to watch the returns at his Mar-a-Lago home before heading to his election night party at the Palm Beach Convention Center.